Thank you, LJ, for the reintroduction, and thank you, Lila, for being here. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and really love the video as well that we just were able to see, because it's a great demonstration again of the power and the potential of AI. I think, as we have heard this morning, AI is having this sort of major moment, not only on this stage, but also on the global stage around the world, be it in the UN, in national governments, in the G7, the G20, et cetera. It's an important time for AI, looking at the incredible benefits, but also having important discussions about those risks and those challenges. So maybe, Lila, for the benefit of our audience, I had, of course, the opportunity to chat with you a bit yesterday, but maybe you could start by telling us a bit about how you started. I think you and I have our 30-plus years experience in the tech sector, maybe in different spaces. Of course, in 1993, when you started at Intel,
Yep.
It was clearly a different world. We didn't really have the internet, and we didn't have mobile phones, and in most of the governments we worked in, it was state-owned PTTs, and there was no competition, and it was really a different world. Maybe share with us a bit about your journey, and also how your sort of vision of how you see things moving, particularly on the AI front.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I'm quite excited to be here discussing AI. It is really such a critical moment in the history of this technology, and we have an opportunity to really shape it moving forward. When I look back, as we were talking yesterday as well, I started in the 90s at a company called Intel, and it was at a time when personal computing was really becoming kind of growing, and I remember so much of my time there of introducing new technologies, working on things that we couldn't even imagine. I remember working on DVD standards in Japan. Little did we know, like, YouTube creators would be a job. And so I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from the time of internet and computing build-out. And really, I spent 18 years at Intel, and then went into venture capital to work with entrepreneurs and to better understand that world. And then moved into a company called Coursera in the early days of really how can we scale technology and education to millions of learners around the world. And when I look back, there's a through line of this intersection of technology and social impact. And I got 25 years into my career and decided I really wanted to be thoughtful about what the next stage was going to look like. And I got connected to a company called DeepMind in London. And I was in Silicon Valley. I'm like, oh, I'm not an AI person. I'm an engineer by background, but this is a little bit different. And why would I move to London, of all places, to work on AI? And so I went and started the interview process, really interrogating whether this was the technology, this was the industry, the location, the organization that I wanted to work in. And the more I learned, the more questions I had. And I got to the point where I had to be very conscious about the decision I was making. I thought a lot about the risks, and I went home to my daughters thinking, oh, can I put them to bed every night knowing what mommy worked on? How would my legacy be in the world? And then I also thought about the opportunity ahead, and I realized that if I could bring my 2.5 decades of experience building technology into new markets, that surely that would be beneficial. And so I made the very conscious decision to join DeepMind, and have spent the past 5 years as Chief Operating Officer. And it's somewhat of a different role. I oversee the operations as a traditional COO, and I also oversee all the work around responsibility and how we collaborate with the outside of the organization on governance and collaborations. So I feel like I've had a real chance to interrogate and build and be accountable and responsible for the work that we're doing. And it kind of brings me to where we are today, which is we a year ago, a lot of people didn't really know including my parents, didn't really understand what I was doing. And yet today, it is definitely the talk around the world. And a lot of it is centered around generative AI and large language models or chatbots. But what excites me is the potential to be so much more, to help us unlock some of the greatest challenges humanity faces. The video that we just saw, the animation, is perhaps one of the areas I'm most excited about, which is how can we use AI to advance science to benefit humanity? So for those of you maybe who weren't familiar with the protein folding problem, it's been a grand challenge of the biology community. Proteins are the basic building blocks of life, and if we can understand how a protein folds, we can also understand how it might misfold. That would help us understand diseases. It would help us, as you saw in the animation, tackle climate issues, such as how to deal with industrial waste. I think it's things like that where AI has the potential to give us solutions in partnership, like as a technology and as a tool for us humans to utilize. And it's the stuff that I can't imagine solving yet that excites me the most on the potential. And I think that this is why we're all here, is really to try to understand how AI can be used for good and how do we accelerate that and ensure that it is ushered into this world in a meaningful way.
Terrific, terrific. When we look at ChatGPT, we see some of the estimates being floated out there is that it could bring some 4.4 trillion to the global economy, and the numbers are like wow, and the example of some of the benefits really, really excite us. But again, picking up on our little conversation yesterday, when it comes to the divides and the inequalities that we see today, and of course I mentioned this morning the 2.7 billion people that are currently not connected at all and are really being left behind. And as I was sharing, I just came back from this refugee camp in Melkadita, Ethiopia, and when we think about those being left behind, certainly this particular camp and the hundreds of thousands in that camp that don't have access to electricity, that don't have access to the internet, and that could really use these incredible benefits of the things that you've just mentioned and the things also that Werner mentioned this morning. So how do you see us sort of moving forward so that we don't leave those that are currently left behind further behind? Do you have thoughts about how we can use the potential of AI to bridge those inequalities that we see today?
There's so much work to be done in this space, and to your point, I think any transformational technology is going to have impact into social issues, economic, and it's really up to us to think about how do we want to carefully manage and mitigate those risks while also providing the opportunities. I think equity is one of the most critical topics and something we spend a lot of time thinking about. And this is an area where no one organization has the answers, and it really requires us to collaborate. I think why we're all here. One of the things that we've been, I'm a daughter of immigrants. I'm like used to being a little bit of an odd one. And so for me, there are so many times I look back and say, I could have easily been left behind. And so it's an area where I've put particular focus throughout my career, and as I came in to an organization that already had spent a lot of time working on responsibility. But we can talk about that internally, but really it's how do we connect to the outside world. So we recently did some work with the Aspen Institute and published a report called The Blueprint for Equitable AI, understanding that this is going to require many of us to come together. And we brought groups of people with very different perspectives, and we had a conversation of like, what does it mean to be equitable in this space, and how can we do it better? What advice would we give, or do we think what are the best practices? And there were really three main takeaways, which may not be a surprise, but I think they're generally good for everyone to be aware of. The first is like AI literacy is a must. It's foundational. We have to help people become more literate in what is AI. The second thing is this requires collaboration and co-creation. This isn't just a technology you lob over. And then the third thing is, how do we bring traditionally marginalized groups along and into the development? And this is something that we've really built into our culture. And in fact, we have a team that we've set up, an institute, the Google DeepMind Institute, which has done a lot of work in trying to do this co-creation. We may have a team of AI and machine learning experts, but how do we bring that knowledge and do knowledge sharing with others who are experts in their field? So maybe I can go back to the AlphaFold example. When we were working on that technology, we knew we needed to get outside advice before we even released it or thought about it. So we sought guidance from over 36 experts, whether they were Nobel Prize laureates or biologists, to say, could this really be useful? Should we release it? How might we think about releasing it? It eventually led to a partnership with the European Bioinformatics Lab, where now you can go in and it's almost like map directions or a search where you can do it and have free access, anybody, to this protein folded prediction. We wanted to make sure that everyone had access to it, so we worked with the Neglected Disease Institute to ensure that they were brought in at the very beginning. Our Google DeepMind Institute also has done a lot of work on the climate and environment. We worked with Climate Change for AI to create data sets that are freely available, again, to try to advance the field as a whole. And we've done work in other sectors as well, so across life sciences, climate sustainability, and equity and awareness. So I think these are, and by the way, I have my colleagues from the Google DeepMind Institute over there. If anybody is looking at ways to co-create or might have some ideas, please find them. That's why we're here, is to try to discover and explore opportunities.
Excellent, thank you. So maybe just picking up on your point about collaboration and co-creation, and linking that to governance. So of course, in March, we had the Elon Musk open letter, and then weeks later, we had the statement that your CEO signed on to, and you yourself, about the risks that AI poses in terms of extinction. And of course, we also have the European Union's AI Act. We're going to hear more about that later today. And the UN Secretary General's, let's say, pleas for urgent action to mitigate risks. So it would be great to get your sense, with all of these calls for governance and regulations, what do you see in terms of how it would look in practice as we look forward to the future AI kind of governance models? If you could share with us your thoughts, that would be great.
Yeah, and I've been asked a lot about that letter as well, and I actually feel like it's our responsibility to be having these conversations. Like I said, I joined this organization because I felt it was a moral calling, and I really wanted to make sure that not only are we looking at the opportunity, but we're having conversations about the risks. And by putting this more in the forefront, it's better to do much sooner than wait until we really need to. So, I think events like this and conversations that are happening are actually quite important, multi-stakeholder conversations. When I take a step back and say, what do we do about, how do we work within our organization? What do we need to build? How can we hold ourselves more accountable into the work that we've done? When DeepMind was founded in 2010, we actually had a set of AI principles. And it's been operationalized over the decade plus. And there's basically 3 ways that we have a framework of 3 different areas. The first is, how do we think about responsible governance? How do we think about responsible research and development? And then deployment and impact. On the governance side, internally, I lead we have a multidisciplinary group where we do our reviews against our principles, and they're both the risks and the red lines, as well as the positive commitments. What might we foresee the risk? How do we plan for that? And it's actually quite interesting because a lot of the AI researchers have a hard time imagining down the road of this going into products. And this is really why it's important to have different voices around the table. And we do this in collaboration, and we do it very early on, even when we're defining the research. So even when we started AlphaFold, of like, how do we want to think about the guardrails on this? It's not something you bolt on at the end when you're getting ready to release something. Externally on governance, we're doing a lot of work, whether it's with the OECD or governments, organizations and communities like this, of having conversations about the fact that this is such an important technology. We have to think about how to govern it well. And it's not any one country, one industry, one community. It really does require us all together. In terms of responsible research, you may be thinking, oh, safety, technical safety, yes, we do that. We do evals, we do red teaming, which is where we go and interrogate our models. But we also invest in other areas, and I think these are kind of back to your point about equity. We've done research in areas like queer fairness, decolonial AI. What are the biases that could be being built in, and how do we just have conversations around this? When we released our first technology paper on language models, we actually postponed releasing the technical paper until we had done a research paper around the taxonomy of language. What are the risks of chatbots? What are the benefits? So that we as an industry can engage, and as a community can engage in these conversations. So that's an example of responsible research. And the last area is really impact and deployment. I gave the example about AlphaFold and releasing that into the industry, and I feel like this is really just being very thoughtful and not beta testing into the world, but how can we be thoughtful in even communications around what is this, what is it capable of, what is it not, how might we bring communities into that process as well. So through that process of like responsibility, I feel like my role as a leader is to create the space to hold folks accountable, for myself to be accountable, to be openly talking about it. Like, this is actually where I feel like as a leader, it's one of the most important things in my role, because the rest of the organization will respond. So creating that space and the conversation around it internally is important, and how do we bridge it into the outside community, I think is equally so. We need to be able to do both.
Absolutely. And I want to perhaps pick up on your points about bias. And of course, I can't resist, because being a leading voice in the AI space and being a woman, I think there's much that we can share and offer to other women that are contemplating, and young girls, the fields that they want to go into. And my colleague, Reinhard, I think he told me that we were about 40% in terms of our participant numbers, women, which is actually record-breaking for the ITU. So to all the women in this room, physically and virtually, thank you for being here. AI, when we talk about bias and the potential to perpetuate existing biases, we need to bring more women into this space. And this is something that the ITU, where we have traditionally been, let's say, very much sort of male-dominated, no disrespect to my elected colleagues in the room. We're doing a lot to try to open opportunities for women and girls in the tech sector in general. And we have something called Girls in ICT Day that we've been running for more than 10 years to try to open girls' eyes to potential career choices and opportunities in the tech sector. We have a Women in Cyber program. We associate with this Women in AI effort, Women in Quantum, Women in Aerospace. So there's a lot of things happening. But as we saw at the recent Commission on the Status of Women a couple of months ago, we're just not moving the needle fast enough in terms of women's participation and getting women's voices to the table. So again, as a leading voice in this debate, what thoughts do you have? What can we do better? And how can we open up opportunities in this field for young women and girls?
Yeah, I'm happy that you've called this out and excited to be talking about this. I feel, maybe I'll start off with a little bit personal first. I chose to go into engineering because I was fortunate where my father used to come home and work on these like beautiful drawings, and I eventually figured out that he was designing heart pacemakers. And my dad's work saved millions of people's lives. But my dad was also an orphan from Lebanon, and I had this connection that engineering was about solving problems and helping people. And when I got to engineering in university, I was by then used to being the odd person out. A lot of it was being the foreigner in the middle of the United States, which didn't have very much diversity. And then when I was 16, I lived in Japan for a year in a city of 40,000 where I was the only foreigner. So by the time I got to engineering as a woman, electrical engineering nonetheless, I'm like, oh, I'm already the oddball. Like I had kind of owned that. I ended up living in Asia for several years for work. And by the time I really realized that throughout my career in Intel in the early days of where we're pioneering so much new technology, I was incredibly fortunate to have allies and sponsors who gave me a seat around the table, who wanted my diverse perspective and helped create that space. And in the role that my father played, I actually went back in 2000 to build a computer lab at the orphanage he was raised, and there were like 1,000 students at the time. And I went to say thank you, but realized how much I got out of that, and it actually led to me forming a nonprofit on how do we work with local communities to bring technology and education with a focus on girls. So, we've done a lot in India and Africa with helping bring technology, skills, and capabilities locally relevant to communities with a focus on young women as well. And so this has been something throughout my entire life and I feel like in many ways I fought being the woman in the room for so long, and now I'm in a position where like, oh, well, wait a minute, how am I going to make the most of this moment? Like, what path can I clear and support others who follow me? And especially as a mom of twin daughters, it's very much on my mind. So at work, some of the things that I do is like really, how do I make sure people are getting a seat at the table and getting the sponsorship and the opportunities? We're also doing a lot of work around education programs. So the Google DeepMind Institute actually has, we did a lot of work in the postgraduate focus in universities because we needed to have a more diverse pipeline immediately to help us build AI. And so we worked with over a dozen countries, over 24 universities, hundreds of scholars, where we not only provided the financial support, but it was the mentoring and coaching. How do you do an interview? How do you write a CV so that they can have a better chance of progressing? And we've now recently launched a program even in Africa of doing an online master's course in AI to try to help close some of the gap. And then we're bringing this into younger years. This is one of my big concerns of like AI, like I said, when I took this job, it's going to impact my daughter's generations and the generations that follow. How do we make sure that we equip them to participate actively and shape where this technology is going? So we've done some work with the Raspberry Pi Foundation to do a program called Experience AI, where we're targeting 11 to 14-year-olds in underserved communities to try to ensure that they're not being left behind. And I think at a young age, especially for girls, to learn that technology can be a tool in helping them. My daughter's dyslexic too, so thinking about like all of a sudden now she has tools that she can use in her toolkit and not be left behind, but actually actively participate. And I think it's things like that of how do we make this personalized empowerment and know that we all can and we all should be part of shaping where this technology is going.
Excellent, thank you. And we'll certainly follow up with you afterwards on some of those points because we'd be keen to find ways perhaps that we could collaborate. That capacity development and providing the needed tools, digital skills for younger audiences is so important as AI evolves and new technology in general.
And also, I just want to, you quoted the 40%. I think part of it is just being present.
Yeah.
So I think it's wonderful. I know this conference is oversubscribed as well, and I think it's just really great to see that people are showing up and engaging in the conversations.
Excellent. So Lila, maybe just a last question. We have gathered in this room, we have 40 plus UN agencies, we have governments, we have the private sector, academia, civil society, we have lots of young volunteers as well. How can we leverage this moment, and what would be the kind of specific action, call to action that you'd like to see coming out of the next 2 days?
Yeah, first of all, again, it's such a diverse group, and it's things like this where we have a chance where everyone's coming with their area of expertise, and part of the magic of what I think AI can help us unlock is the intersection of our areas of expertise. So I think this is first you're here, make the most of it, but how do we also raise our voices collectively in the conversation externally? I'm hearing there's a lot of voices in AI right now, but we need more diverse perspectives. We need focus on the risks. Unfortunately, we have Hollywood who has helped us paint a vision of things that could go wrong. What are areas where they could go? How do we manage that? Absolutely. And how do we uncover what's possible, what could be possible, and how do we accelerate getting there? And I think that's really what I'm excited to start discussing more.
Terrific. Me too. Thank you so much. This has been a terrific discussion. Lila Ibrahim, thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, this wraps up our panel. And back to you, LJ, for what's to come. Thank you.
Thank you.